Nate, we are back and we are talking what we trade every single first round rookie pick for. But today we're talking about it with a bit of a spin. We're talking about it for one quarterback leagues. We touched on Superflex already. If you missed that video, you want to see some Superflex values in the last 2 weeks, we dropped that video. So, with all that said, we're going to get into this. We're going to get into the strategy behind why we're trading out of these picks, so on and so forth. But before we do, be sure to like the video if you enjoyed. Comment down below what you're trying to do with your rookie first round picks in your one quarterback leagues. Don't miss out on the 7-day free trial on us at patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. You will get a free 7-day trial to our Discord server and our bonus podcast as well if you choose that selected tier. So get in on that. Come hang out with us in Discord. Let's talk about it that much further in depth. Let's help you win your draft this year, this season. But with all that said, all the promo in the books, Nate, we're going to get into this one. We are talking the 101 first. And we do want to say, throw out why we talk these topics so much. One reason we love implementing trading out into our tool belt is because you're not restricted by what you can add to your team because of the values that are dictated by the values on the draft board. Just something to think about. You don't have to solely draft best player available when you could possibly fill a need by trading out. Just something to keep in mind and possibly get the best value on your team that isn't on the draft board. Think outside the box, outside the draft. Kicking it to you with 101. I'll follow it up with my 101 side of things, but who do you got? What are you trying to get out of your 101 pick?
Yeah, piggybacking off, you had a great intro for me because talking about, these draft picks, maybe you don't go and get what's on the board. And I think with the 101, we can do something this year that we don't usually have the opportunity to do. And this year, the running back draft class, we've heard about it. We've heard that it's not great. We've heard that it's not very strong. We still like it here at the Rewind. We still like the depth of it. But we also know at the same time, there's not, that top tier talent at the running back position this year. It's missing those studs that we're used to seeing, that can make it into the first round of not just the NFL draft, but we expect to see multiple first round running backs in our rookie draft. So we're not really seeing that so far. So if you have the 101 and you're a running back away, or you need a running back to build around as you're coming out of the rebuild, there's not one on the board right now. There's not an option. And there's not even an option really to trade down a couple picks and still pick up a stud running back. So how do you get that stud running back for your team? Use the 101. Go knock on the door and find out what the price is for Breece Hall, who is one of the best running backs in Dynasty. He had an incredible season coming off the ACL this year. 17.1 fantasy points per game, Bob. An RB4 finish in this year after the ACL tear. We call this kind of like an off year. We don't really count it because, hey, they're coming off the injury. They're going to suck for their first year. They're not going to get their explosiveness back. And year two is what we're looking for. Well, year one, Breece Hall just did incredible from a fantasy perspective. And from an on-the-field perspective, like the efficiency wasn't even that great. Comparing it to his rookie year, his yards per carry went down from 5.8 to 4.5. His juke rate went down from 50.5%, which was first in the NFL last year, to 25.8% this year, which was still fifth in the NFL. His evaded tackles also went down. He had 7.1 per game last year. He had 4.5 this year. Still first in the NFL with 77 on the season. But despite this efficiency going down, he still put up one of the best seasons that we've seen from a running back this season. And I'm just excited about what's ahead for him. The receiving work we really saw this year, 76 receptions for 591 yards. Just volume everywhere, on the ground, through the air. The Jets were leaning into him. Now, he gets a quarterback upgrade next year. Probably won't see as much receiving work as they have Aaron Rodgers as the starting quarterback, but his efficiency should go back up. And with how they love to ride Breece Hall volume-wise, I could see him being the RB1 overall next season and competing for that for many years to come. So, when I'm looking at the 101, I'm looking at Marvin Harrison Jr., in one quarterbacks. I love having Marvin Harrison Jr., but if I can get what I truly believe is an equivalent at the running back position, I think if you're a team that's getting ready to compete, this could be a game-changing move for you.
Yeah, I love this. I love the Breece Hall ad. I still think he's somehow somewhat of a value coming into the post-ACL tear year. Yeah. And like you noted, the situation should be getting a little better. Hopefully they can build up that offensive line. Hopefully they have a quarterback that can keep pressure at bay that much more, with actually being able to throw the ball downfield. They have to respect the quarterback that much more. And all that boils into better efficiencies, most likely for the running back. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful, instead of a vicious circle, it's like a happy circle. That's
Happy
going to be
circle.
working, a happy circle working for Brees Hall next year.
Yeah.
And like I said, I still think you can get him at a decent value. I think this is awesome to go get if you, like you said, are that team looking to come out of the rebuild and make a staple move, a big splash move to say, Zach brought up this point previously, like at one point you need to trigger yourself into saying, I'm done rebuilding. This is a buy that does that. And it puts the league on notice too, because you shouldn't be buying Brees Hall if you're just starting off in a rebuild. Transitioning to my side at this point, got to keep team situation in mind here. Can't go running back. Can't go looking for a running back to trade for if our team's just in bad shape. If we earn this 101, it's hard to make that justified. And if we're far from competing all the things, we likely need to focus on making the most of what we're acquiring with this pick. There's two avenues to go about this. You can go for one player. And if you're going to go for one player, I think you may as well just draft Marvin Harrison Jr., but that's not what we're talking about today. So the other option, the other avenue is, let's talk about diversifying this pick. Chase someone that has already cooked in the league for a year, has shown some promise. Someone like Rashee Rice, in my opinion, somebody I'm excited to kind of go and knock on the doors of, and somebody who there's still doubts on of, the Chiefs are going to add somebody. Rashee Rice is, going to fall off, because Rashee Rice is a dude. Rashee Rice has looked great all season, has looked great in yards after the catch, per reception. All of the metrics we like to see was reliable. It has been reliable in the playoffs. And on top of this, I still think you can chase a 25 first. So you get an additional first next year along with your own. And you get an additional first in 26 if you want to kick it out that far. Or if they have another first in 25, you could pull that one too. And if those firsts do trend to be looking later with whatever team you're trading with, I think you can pull some seconds into this deal as well, just to justify having a little bit later picks to pad some value. Ideally, if you are making this move, you have to consider the team you're trading with too. Unlike if they were trading into a running back like last year when they were trading into Bijan, they might not be the most competitive team. Like last year, if you were trading into Bijan, you're expecting to be dealing with a competitive team. Might not be the case with Marvin Harrison Jr. You might just have somebody wanting to jump the guy's bones to have him on his roster because he's supposed to be God's next gift at wide receiver. Just something to think about. So you might be able to, like I said, pivot off of this to build, pad some value, get the most out of you that you can of the 101. And if it's like just your first kind of go around in Dynasty, or whether you're just new to a rebuild or new to really trying to turn a rebuild around, diversifying your asset pool, getting extra assets, getting above board with how many picks are God given, your standard draft capital that you start with, that's how you start rebuilds, and that's how you really kick things off in your favor and start piling more and more talent on your roster. And then we get into discussions about knowing who to draft and who not to draft, which we're going to be getting into on the channel. So subscribe so you don't miss that. Nate, feel free to add on to this point, or let's talk about the 102.
I like this trade, Rashee Rice and 2 firsts. I'd be happy moving off the 101 with that. I think that's good value there. With the 102, I'm also looking at a wide receiver. I'm sticking with, who can I get straight up for this pick? For the 102, most people are probably looking at Malik Neighbors at that point. And it's usually a little bit easier to make a trade, in the same position. So while this 102 is not set with a position, we kind of have a consensus 1 and 2 at this point. And with Malik Neighbors, I feel that I could make the move from Malik Neighbors to Garrett Wilson. I think I can make the move from the 102 to Garrett Wilson, who people are a little down on, even though he has back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons to start out his career and has played with terrible quarterbacks throughout that entirety. And he's about to have the best quarterback of his career next year with Aaron Rodgers. I know he's old. I know he's coming off the Achilles injury, but he's still got a live arm, and his accuracy and anticipation is still there. Garrett Wilson saw 168 targets this year. There is no competition there for him. I don't know if they're planning to bring in any. We know that Aaron Rodgers certainly does not mind having a bona fide wide receiver 1 to work with and kind of leaving the rest of the group away. So if that's what Garrett Wilson's looking at next year, I'm not even worried about what the quarterback situation is after that. I think Garrett Wilson's going to cement his place as a top 5 wide receiver next year, catching passes from Aaron Rodgers. So, with 95 receptions, 1,042 yards, and 3 touchdowns this year, he only had 12.5 fantasy points per game. And people are a little down on Garrett Wilson. He's still, now don't get me wrong, he's still a startup first-round pick at wide receiver. He's still usually considered wide receiver 6 or 7 in a lot of rankings. But I think Garrett Wilson is a top 5 guy. He just had a down season to what we were expecting because of the injury. So Garrett Wilson out there, 992 unrealized air yards. So that's, just throwing down the field, not connecting. We saw it a ton this year. 66.1 quarterback rating per target, was 89th in the league, Bob. So with the production that we've already seen as a floor with terrible quarterbacks, it's only going to get better from here on out. I think we have a little bit of a buy window on Garrett Wilson. It's certainly going to close shut very soon. I think the 102 is an appropriate move to go get Garrett Wilson right now for your team. Go get someone that you know is already that stud wide receiver.
Yeah, I like this a good bit. And this kind of leans into the concept of what could be in discussions with rebuilding. We talked about another reason why to trade out at times when that makes sense is to expedite the course of the rebuild. Because if you draft somebody at 102, love Malik Neighbors, who's the projected 102 in most drafts at this point, love Malik Neighbors. But the fact of the matter is, it's unlikely he reaches his fullest potential in year 1 and 2. Garrett Wilson's already gone through those growing pains, already gone through the terrible possible quarterback landing spot, gone through all of the adjustments of the league. Not that I think he had a ton to have because he's super polished prospect coming in. But, that's just one of the ways that you can kind of expedite things instead of, drafting somebody to be your guy that, what we talk about, the homegrown talent because you drafted him, whatever the case is, having the roots in that, instead of that, you can just go to the guy who's already good, that is already a very high valued wide receiver in the league. And I do think that there is some, like you said, too, with Garrett Wilson, just, leaving some to be desired. And to clarify, he's still a very good player. Had that in the comments commenting back when I mentioned it in a previous video as well. Still a very good player, but has not met expectations for what people wanted out of him the last 2 years. And that leaves a bad taste in people's mouths sometimes. And because not everyone is a 100% rational thinker or is willing to take a step back and say, well, why did he struggle? Oh, because he had Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and God knows who else chucking him the ball all year in the last 2 seasons. Weird. Yeah, he hasn't hit his stride quite yet in the NFL to his full extent, which we believe he can get to. So I love this concept. And I'm going for another Ohio State alum at this point. And I was thinking about this and I'm like, how easy would it be to flip this pick for Jackson Smith and Jigba with how much the community has turned on him and hated him and get a more significant plus on top of him in return than you should be able to? Do we think that we could get a 25 first on top of JSN at this point for this pick?
Yeah.
With how low things have been, I wouldn't call it unlikely either. I think you can start there. I think if you come away with multiple seconds on top, I'd be pretty happy with that too, because I think JSN is set to ascend. We saw, some obviously less involvement than we would have loved to see, but we have to factor that offense was sputtering all year with Geno Smith. He was playing behind 2 very established wideouts. I like to think that we see a bit of a changing of the guard with how these wide receivers are implemented. I tend to believe that Tyler Lockett's going to get drawn back. I think he still is going to be a reliable wideout, but I don't think he's going to be as involved as he has been in the past. But can we get buying low, quote unquote, even though we're spending this high pick, can we just get another pick to re-roll with next year? And again, take a player who's already cooked in the league and get a significant asset on top. This is one of those, lateral tear down trades that I discuss from time to time where we trade down from a higher valued consensus player and get a significant ad on top. And I bring up the ad because in a previous video, 2 moves to make, certifying moves to make, we talked about a trade that went down in our Discord, buying JSN for the 203 and 209 in Superflex leagues. I know that's not what this is, but either which way, still an insane deal. And I'm not saying you're going to be able to buy him for that cheap. But throw out some offers, knock on some doors, knock out the door if you have to, if they're not responding soon enough. But with that said, feel free to touch on this one, Nate, or roll into the 103.
Yep. So looking at the 103, I actually had a situation and a B situation here. I think if you are a competing team that kind of lucked into the 103, you had some extra first round pick laying around that you got from somebody and you somehow have this pick. Or maybe you missed the playoffs because you had some injuries. Kirk Cousins is your quarterback 1 and Joe Burrow, and this is just where you are. 103 can get us Tyreek Hill and can put that little bow on our competitive team and make sure that we're going to get all the fantasy points that we need in 2024 and 2025. We've heard all this about Tyreek Hill. Oh, he's going to retire in 3 years, and that was a year ago, so now it's only 2 years. Well, we all forgot that he kind of quickly ran that back about in like the next week. And also, Tyreek Hill is only going to be about 31 in 2 years. So with his level of play, those wide receivers, maybe they start to decline from there, but we could easily see Tyreek Hill play into 33, 34, 35 even. He could decrease a lot and still be quite the good wide receiver at the NFL level. So I'm not too worried about Tyreek Hill's long-term dynasty longevity. I think he fits the 2 to 3 year window that we're usually looking for. So if we're a competitive team and we have this 1-3 somehow, I want to go see what I can do to get Tyreek Hill. I think he is a stud. He is going to be one of the top 5, top 10 wide receivers every single season for the next couple seasons. So can we make that happen? Once again, if you're in a rebuild, Tyreek Hill is probably not the move to make. So in that instance, I would go after Chris Olave. You might even be able to get something back on top of Chris Olave, depending on the owner. And if they're kind of just, tired of not just Olave himself, but kind of the Saints situation. It's never been that great so far through the first 2 years. So Chris Olave, we've seen what he's done over the first 2 years. He hasn't been in the spotlight as much as some of these other young wide receivers. And much of it is because of the Saints' lack of success. And because of that, we don't have quite the same valuation of Chris Olave as we do players that he's actually produced very similar to, if not better, like Garrett Wilson. And because of that, Chris Olave remains a value, even though he's considered a top 8, top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty. And with the 103, we're looking at Rome Odunze here. We're looking at Brock Bowers, both guys who I would love to pick up. But this goes back to the situation. Can we accelerate that rebuild a little bit? Can we kind of trade Rome Odunze for Chris Olave? I think it's pretty much a lateral move, and we're moving up 2 years in our ability to produce points. And if we have any kind of core that we've already put together, this is the chance for us to finish this, go into, hey, I'm starting to compete now. You might not be the top team right away. It might take 2 or 3 years to be the top team. But once you can compete and you feel like you can get into the playoffs and make some noise, you should go for it.
I love both of these additions so dang much. And my one couple additions, I don't know how many there's actually going to be, but we're going to start with 1 or 2. Been doing a lot of roster reviews lately. If you want your roster review, check out the YouTube description box below. There'll be a pinned comment as well. Check out what we got going on with that. But been doing a lot of roster reviews where teams are on the fringe of being competitive, but they don't have that elite wide receiver one that can put up 20 points plus a game consistently and blow up for even more like a Tyreek Hill could. This is an option where if you do have that pick, instead of a lot of teams will naturally gravitate towards, well, I just want the young wide receiver who's also going to be really good very soon. Fact of the matter is, like you said, Rome Odunze probably not going to pop off, not going to be productive early. So if you need that top tier producer as a competitive roster who, like you said, the quote unquote lucked into this pick or was, had the wherewithal to buy into a pick for whatever value you could and had this one laying around maybe from the startup draft 2 or 3 years ago, you had this pick kicking around, gathering dust for a couple years. Hey, congrats, it's 103 now. Love that concept. And let's say you do have a top producer already. Let's say you have a Jamar Chase or you have a Justin Jefferson kicking around that you can rely on for your top production that's also young. Chris Olave, not bad for a competitive roster right now either. Still not, elite for a competitive roster, but not bad. He can slot in as your wide receiver 2 or an immediate elite flex play that you're paying for the 103 that you get a lot more consistency avoiding the speed bumps of like you would with Rome Odunze at this point, specifically if you went for that pick. So love both of these options. There's a lot you can play with this one. Love both of these avenues for kind of whatever you need out of it. And Olave obviously does more than likely lend a longer career span than we expect Tyreek Hill to, although we're not, expecting a retirement press conference from Tyreek Hill tomorrow either. So for me, love these picks. I would have gone with Olave here if you hadn't have, but I'm okay with at this point going after a running back for the same reasons that you've mentioned. If you need something to help fill your running back spot as a competitive roster, you're trying to come out of the rebuild, you're trying to figure out running back, whatever the case is, you can't draft one here. There's not going to be one on the board here. I don't foresee a even possible landing spot at this point that would make anybody realistically, reasonably draft a running back at 103 in this draft, especially with the talent that's on the board. So instead of doing that, you go outside of what's on the board, You target the entire community as your draft board instead, or the entire league dynamic as your draft board instead. See if you can draft Jonathan Taylor with the 103 instead of drafting Romo Dunze or even Brock Bowers at this point. So love getting what I believe to be a bounce back player in Jonathan Taylor, who had a rough year, had the, contract situation going on, and he was hurt before that while that was going on. And then he comes back, slowly integrated into the offense, gets banged up again. Hopefully we see a fully healthy Jonathan Taylor, but like we've also touched on, and we touched on in our pre-show discussion, if you don't have one of these top running backs, it feels like you don't have any running backs. And Jonathan Taylor could be somebody who you slot in as your one. I'm looking to do it. He's locked in for at least another 2 years. He has an easy out after 2026, but easy peasy, lemon squeezy running back here at 103 for me. Nate, what do you got at 104?
All right, at the 104, I'm going to go ahead and do I'm going to tear down and get something on top here. And I'm going after Jordan Addison and a 2025 first. With the 104, I've now passed. I'm expecting Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Roma Dunze. Say Brock Bowers is on the board, but I want to continue to build around wide receiver. I might already have a tight end because, hey, look, we finally have enough tight ends in Dynasty where you might already have one. It's not like the past 2 years where if you didn't have one of the top couple guys like running backs are now, then you didn't have anybody. Now you might actually have someone at tight end and have some flexibility to go after some other positions and pick up value. So you're probably thinking that with the 104. Well, Jordan Addison is a great pickup here. He was one of the best rookie wide receivers that we saw this year. He put together 911 yards, and that was with only playing half a season with Kirk Cousins, and then a carousel of quarterbacks after that. And in the games that he played with Kirk Cousins, in the 8 games he played with Kirk Cousins, he had 7 touchdowns. He finished the year with 10, but 7 touchdowns in the 8 games to start his season and playing with Kirk Cousins. So moving forward, even with Justin Jefferson there, Jordan Addison showed us that he can be a very, very productive wide receiver too. And when Justin Jefferson went down, Jordan Addison stepped up as a wide receiver one for a struggling offense and was that wide receiver one for them. He filled those shoes rather well, as best as you could fill them for Justin Jefferson, I guess. So what I saw from Jordan Addison, I was a huge fan of him coming into the NFL. Bob, if you remember, I had him in the same tier as JSN, and you were not happy about that. And I understand you might even still feel kind of similar. Jordan Addison would be one of the top wide receivers in this draft if we were just comparing them. Where especially after a year of NFL play to these guys, maybe he's not the Malik Neighbors tier, Roma Dunze tier, but he is above every other wide receiver at this point for me. So if I can kind of take the drop off and still pick up a really good wide receiver and some draft capital on top of it, I would love to make this kind of move. I'm not sure if you can always get that 2025 first on top of Jordan Addison here. You might be looking at a second. If you're going to get that first, it's probably from a team that has a late 25 first or what they're expecting to be a late 25 first. But Jordan Addison, I want more Jordan Addison on my teams as I go into 2024 because he already had a really good year. He didn't break 1,000 yards, though. He didn't have that kind of, hey, rookie of the year kind of year. And he was overshadowed by Puka Nacua and everything that he did, Rashee Rice. But Jordan Addison, one of the top sophomore wide receivers next year. Let's go see if we can get him plus something right now.
Yeah, I like this. And like you said, I don't know if you can get that 25 first, but I do think you can get a pretty nice plus on top, whether it's a second, whether it's maybe a second and a third. I think you can do that because I do think this is similar to where he would slot into a draft next year. I think probably after Brock Bowers. So I think 105 would probably be where you're getting into like a straight up discussion for him. So at 104, you get a little more back. So I think you can do it. I think you can. And maybe that's where you throw a second next year to secure the 25 first.
Yeah, certainly would not mind that.
Something like that. I'm always in discussions that if you can't get it straight up added onto, to throw the following round pick or one of the following rounds picks to kind of be like, hey, you're still getting something next year. You're not just losing out on a draft pick entirely. It's just demoting the draft pick a little bit. And if you're going to be a late pick anyway, you're fine. You don't
already basically a second, pick. Right? Come on.
Exactly. Just think of it as we're just swapping seconds at this point.
Yeah.
But either which way, moving on to my target for this one, I'm looking at running back again here. And because I think there's a lot of focus on running back for me, especially through the rest of this, but in this draft, because it's going to feel kind of gross drafting a running back
Yeah.
in this class. As much as we like this class for its values, I think it's going to be tough to really feel good about drafting a running back in the first round of one quarterbacks. That's the one nice thing in Superflex. A lot of them are going to get pushed to the second. I don't know if that happens as much in one quarterback, because in one quarterback, we know running back values go up a little bit, especially in rookie drafts. They like to get their guy at running back and, somewhat build around that a little bit more. But if I have this pick and I don't want tight end, I don't want Brock Bowers, I want to go somewhere else, I want to look for tight end maybe later down the board with a pick, whatever the case is, I'm looking to target Kyren Williams. And I know that you are not as in on the Kyren Williams train as much as I am, but it's well documented. I'm in on the Kyren Williams train, and this is the highest pick I think I can send for him justifiably. I was thinking about it at 103, felt better about Jonathan Taylor because we've seen a little bit longer production, has a bit of a better college profile and whatnot. But Kyren Williams cannot be denied what he's put on the field as of late. And if you really think about the security of their contract situations, while Jonathan Taylor's making tens of millions of more dollars per year, they're both essentially set to run out because Jonathan Taylor can be cut for little to no dead cap after the 2026 season. That's when Kyron's a free agent too. We can only look at these guys as long as their contracts. And right now, I feel really good about where Kyron's at in that backfield. And even if they bring somebody in, I'm sure they will. And I don't hate it. They've been trotting out Ronnie Rivers as a compliment to Kyren Williams over there. And,
bringing back Darrell Henderson
from the dead to, try to make something while Kyren was banged up this year. So I wouldn't mind them bringing in someone to spell him a little bit even, but it's not going to sway me from being all about Kyren as much as I can. And before the value gets even more out of hand, because if he comes back one more year, you're not buying in smartly again the following year, because he'll be starting up a contract year because he'll be in his fourth year. Don't love buying in on contract year running backs. So at least you get him for 2 full years. You get them for that. It's a little bit different when you're getting 2 full years versus buying in for one. Then you're dealing with a headache. You get a lot more value on your buy-in then. So, and the thing is too, when I'm looking for competitive assets, trying to kind of get out of the middle, the early middle, albeit, trying to pull myself out of there. You can't find much better competitive assets at this pick. And I know there's other longer lasting options on the draft board. So if you're rebuilding, absolutely do not target Kyren Williams. Go back to Nate's decision with Jordan Addison plus a late first next year or some other compensation draft picks wise. But when it comes to longer lasting assets available for the trade, I'm kind of limited. Thank you, Nate. Props to getting to the sheet first this time. So I just can't wait. We're trying to make it a big smorgasbord of different players to kind of play around with. So we're trying not to use multiple players more than once. Or players more than once in general. So that's where I'm at with 104, going after one of my favorite running backs. I know Zach will be pleased that I brought him up. But Nate, let's talk about the 105. I love your pick here at the 105. Could not pick for a better option here at 105. Talk about it.
Thank you very much. I'm all about picking up good wide receivers who are in that next tier of wide receiver. We're not talking about CeeDee Lamb, not talking about Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, but those couple next tiers of wide receiver, they're such values because they're the wide receiver 20 or whatever. They're devalued, even though there's not much difference between the wide receiver 10 and the wide receiver 20 in Dynasty at this point. We have such a large grouping of wide receiver 2s that can also be low-end wide receiver 1s. And one of my favorite guys in that group, who I think is one of the best values right now, thanks to his rookie teammate taking off in the couple games he was around, Nico Collins, who performed extremely, extremely well this year. Almost had 1,500 yards on the season when you take into account the playoffs. Without the playoffs, he was about 1,200 yards. It was at the top of the league with 7.1 yards after the catch per reception. So Nico Collins, being 6'4", 215 pounds, and winning contested catches, still one of the best creators in the NFL this season after the catch. That combination is rare. We don't see a lot of players who can win at the catch point and then also create their own yards afterwards. They just don't usually go together. In seeing Nico Collins this year take off with CJ Stroud in his rookie year, I want more Nico Collins on my team. I expect the Texans to assign him to a long-term contract, possibly this offseason. He's going to be going into a contract year. They have every reason to sign him to a long-term contract right now. before he goes into that contract extension, because we know he's going to get more expensive if he has to hit free agency. If he has this another good season in front of him, they have Tank Dell under lock for a couple of years, so they can afford to pay for Nico Collins. And I want that piece of the CJ Stroud-led Houston Texans offense moving forward. And I think Nico Collins is the wide receiver one there. As much as I love Tank Dell, it might be a 1A, 1B situation, but I don't think there's any situation where Nico Collins is really going to not be a 1,000-yard receiver, not see 6-8 touchdowns a year at least, and see 120 targets a year. I think he's going to be that wide receiver two, with that upside for the wide receiver one on a weekly basis. With his ability to create yards, we always have that upside. I'm buying all in on Nico Collins. And with the 105 here, Bob, I think we can get something on top for Nico Collins because of the value that he's kind of undervalued right now. He's not in that Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle tier. He's below that. And because of that, I think we can probably get a 25-second on top of it.
God, he should be, though. He should be in that
tier. He should be. He should be. People need to see another year of that before they put him in that tier, and I get it. But let's go ahead and buy in now so that when he puts up that other year, we got him a little bit cheaper. So 105 for Nico Collins in a 25 seconds, what I'm looking for. You know what, Bob? If I can only get Nico Collins for the 105, I'm still happy making that move. He's better than anyone I'm drafting at that point.
Yeah, I'm with you, and you nailed it. Whoever you're drafting there, you're probably hoping turns into Nico Collins.
Yeah, if I'm drafting Brian Thomas, I'm literally hoping that he is the next Nico Collins.
That would be perfect. It'd be great. It'd be like you can almost get Nico Collins. But touching on that point, again, dialing in on the rookie fever that'll be happening out with these picks. And the thing that people need, that you brought up the idea that people need to see it again with Nico Collins. The first 2 seasons of his career, people forget, pretty efficient, banged up, and playing with terrible quarterbacks.
Hey, Davis Mills. We respect Davis.
Deserves some respect. I'm sorry. I apologize. My bad.
He was adequate.
I know there was a quarterback competition for a while between him and CJ Stroud. I know I should put more respect on the name, but either which way, I think Collins it's one of those, the prototypical cliche 30-year breakout, but it was one of those things where it just finally got it all together, finally was able to stay healthy, had the quarterback upgrade that he needed. Nico Collins is exactly like we said, what we want the 105, whatever we're drafting at 105 to be. And if you just get Collins out of it, all about it, because he should be a heck of a lot higher rated in, Dynasty Rankings, Dynasty Circles, community, whatever you want to talk about. And one of the things I've seen pop up in our Discord, and maybe there's some justification to it, is, the concept of if the Texans draft a wide receiver. I don't care, because Nico Collins is cemented as the one, at worst, 1A, 1B with Tank Dell. And there's no other wide receivers being retained right now, as far as I'm aware, on that roster. So they have to go get somebody. So if they draft somebody,
Xavier Hutchinson will be there. John Metchie.
Good call. I apologize. You're right. So there's those 2 guys as well, but they're probably going to add somebody. I'm not sweating those guys. I'm not sweating Metchie or Hutchinson at this point, as much as we love those guys. You and I both were big on Xavier Hutchinson, but obviously hasn't panned out. And and then there's always the concern, like you brought up too, of Nico is heading into a free agent or a contract year. Again, I'm not going to sweat it. I'm not going to sweat it with a wide receiver like I would a running back, because Nico is probably most likely, at least potentially, as good as he is anywhere as he is with CJ Stroud. Because I think the talent is there, and I think that talent has always been there. It's just a matter of now he's been healthy, and he is with a great quarterback. So, I doubt he gets signed to a team with just no quarterback going on. And if he decides to make that decision for himself, well, I can't help you.
He can create yards, and players who can create yards can make something happen even with a bad quarterback.
Right. Exactly. And that's the hope. That's the game we're playing. Speaking of games to play, being at the 105, I know we don't have trading down on our list of things we can do. That's kind of a rule. We're trying to avoid trading down, so we don't. Otherwise, we just trade down every pick and it'd be a blast. But maybe that's another video for another day. But either which way, trading down at this point is definitely something that you should have on the table for yourself. We talk about in drafts, don't lock yourself into who you're drafting. That's a big part of what this exercise is. If you're on the board, or you're about to be on the board sooner, because draft picks will increase in value over time, have drafting the player in your toolkit, have trading out in your toolkit, have trading down in your toolkit. Because that's how you're going to find the best value and make the most out of every single draft. And do that with us in our Dynasty Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Get a free week on us from me and Nate. You're welcome, I guess. But for me at this pick, I'm going to take your boy, Zay Flowers, who did not have the greatest showing in the AFC Championship game,
I
but
mean, he
did
looked pretty
have
good
a
except for
good
that one
showing.
play.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wasn't his finest moments all over the place. And the thing about that play is like, I think too many people, just get off track real quick. I think too many people are blaming Zay Flowers, but it was a really good play by Snead to punch that ball out at the half-inch line. And I think like most players don't do that. And I think it's just one of those, don't stretch the ball out over the goal line. It's a cardinal sin, whatever the case is. But man, that was a good play. So I'm not going to blame Zay Flowers for that. It's a little, that taunting call was a little rough, but either which way, still love Zay Flowers, still love the talent, put a lot on display this year. Another guy who's kind of feels like he's been left to the wayside with how well he produced for a good chunk of the year. And when we go back and look at his prospect film, the explosiveness, all of the things, the quick snap route running, good hands. I mean, this guy's only going to get better. And I love that, hopefully we have a full complement of weapons for the entire season next year with Mark Andrews hopefully coming back healthy and, figuring out whatever contract situation stuff might need to get figured out. Not going to get into that. But I think this too, like Collins, like even with Addison, like you picked before, good compensation if you miss out on the top tier wide receivers, good consolation prizes, quote unquote, if you can't trade down and pile on more assets for a possible rebuild. Because we are in a similar tier here for picks 105 to probably 108 or maybe even a little later, depending on how the board continues to shake out as we work through pre-draft season. Let's kick it to the 106. Tell me what you got here. You were going with another very on-brand decision for you. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm continuing to build around wide receivers that I know can already produce, but have the value because they're in that, hey, they're not in their first 1 or 2 years anymore. They don't have the allure of the potential and upside, but they performed well enough that we know they're good, but they're not old enough to be considered veterans, but they're somewhere in the middle. And there is so much value in these players. And another one that I think that we can go target right now who's undervalued with the 106 is T. Higgins. Just turned 25. The past 2 seasons before this season, he did have over 1,000 yards every single season. In fact, 2,500 yards between 2021 and 2022. In 2023, he dealt with a lot of injuries, and he only had 656 yards, still had 5 touchdowns, played with backup quarterbacks for most of the season. T. Higgins going into a contract year, I do expect him, I think at this point, to stay with the Bengals. I think they're going to franchise tag him is what it sounds like, but there's also the potential of them tagging him and trading him as well. So whether it's with the Bengals, we know what we have. We have a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. If it's not with the Bengals, I think we have the upside for a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, where he is the wide receiver 1 for a team. The biggest thing between him and a wide receiver 1 finish outside of health is Jamar Chase. So if he's on a different team, I think it's wheels up for T. Higgins. If he's on the Bengals again, we already know what we're getting. We're getting a really good wide receiver that when he's on the field, he's able to score touchdowns. He's able to make plays down the field, and he's got a star quarterback throwing the ball to him as well. So T. Higgins is a target for me this offseason as people are down on him. You know me, I love going and getting value. I love these wide receivers that people are down on. And like I said, these wide receivers in this tier, like Nico Collins, like T. Higgins, like Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk, who I know those two are valued a bit higher, but still valued a bit lower than players who put up similar production just because, hey, they're 25, 26 years old now. And that's plenty of time still as a wide receiver. There's not only in my 2 to 3 year window, Bob, they're still in my 5 to 6 year window. I'm targeting these guys because you talked about it. Once we get out of the first couple of picks, we're in this tier range where all these picks are kind of valued the same. And there's guys I like, but not guys that I feel really confident about joining my team. And if I can go get a guy like T. Higgins or like who we just talked about, we talked about Nico Collins and Jordan Addison. I've seen those guys play really well at the NFL level. And if I can go stamp that onto my team, make sure that I have that stud, like why wouldn't I make that pick? Just because I really want a homegrown player who I drafted? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know, I like FIFA and Madden too. I love having the guys you draft and raise up and build and develop. But this is fantasy football. I'm not developing anybody.
I just want the players that score me the most points and win me the most games. That's what
Yeah,
I
man.
want. That's what I get off on. But speaking of something else to possibly, I guess, get off on, that's not appropriate at all. But something or someone you can target, I think, at this pick that I really like. Let's say you were somehow really hoping, wishing you had a pipe dream that you were going to get Brock Bowers at this pick. You
Hmm.
couldn't. It's way too early to target the Tavion Sanders or any of the other tight ends in this class by a long shot. I think you can go move this pick for somebody like TJ Hawkinson.
I
And
love
I
it.
think that you have to temper expectations early on in the year. And something I've been doing again in roster reviews is throwing out the concept of going and getting TJ Hawkinson or any other player that, if they have TJ Hawkinson, you have to keep in mind, hey, he's going to be a rough start. If you're a competitive team with that slow start, go buy somebody cheap like Cole Kmet. Right now, Cole Kmet is still severely undervalued for what he's finished as over the last 2 seasons.
Yep.
And I know he's had some dud games. Expected to have a quarterback upgrade. It's sounding more and more. We're hearing more and more smoke for whatever it's worth that Caleb Williams is looking like the guy in Chicago. He could be even better.
Mhm.
He's been great the last 2 seasons with a bad player in Justin Fields. A lot of quoties going on there. But go get TJ Hawkinson with this pick. Even with that slow start, you're getting an elite ass at a position at a discount. And whenever you can do that, still relatively young, just locked into a long-term contract deal, fix his back issues that he was having coming into the season as well. So that's always good to hear that, money cures just about everything. But TJ Hawkinson for sure, somebody I'm looking to grab, especially with one of these mid-round picks where, like you said, the values are just kind of meshing all over the place. You're expediting things so much more quickly, and this is a great move if you're, like I said, if you were, quote unquote, somehow selling out for Brock Bowers at the 106 or whatever the case is, you really have a hole at tight end, and you want to get into that top tier of players, that top three-ish that's looking like it's going to be for the next 3 or so years. TJ Hawkinson, it's going to be a slow start to this year, but I think after that, you're
He'll be
gravy.
golden.
So, anything else to add to that, or dive into 107?
All right, Bob.
I'm chilly. It's cold here.
I'm buying with the 107 another wide receiver. A wide receiver that
You
I have
know,
not said to buy for a while. And you know what, Bob? I'm willing to add on to the 107 to go get this wide receiver. I'll throw a second on there, no problem.
wow,
Go give me Drake London. I want Drake London. Can you imagine?
it's crazy. Crazy times.
Look, Drake London, we've seen him suffer at the hands of Arthur Smith over the last 2 years. Now that is the Steelers' problems. That's Deontay's problem now. That's George Pickens' problem now. But Drake London is free. He's free, and he's at his lowest value that we've seen over the past 2 years. It's like, you ever see that like supply and demand chart where they meet in the middle? That's what you want to price it at. That's how I look at fantasy players. What's your supply and, who you have positionally, and then your demand and your consensus. And then look at production. And Drake London is finally lining up to be a buy, and I love it. And I think with the 107 and a second round pick on that, you're probably going to be able to make that move from most people who are not too informed about the Falcons' new hire at offensive coordinator who's coming over from the Rams, who just put together an incredible season for Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua. Drake London is about to see a lot of targets. He's about to get a lot of yards. He's going to have his best season in his third year. There's many people who will say that Drake London already has broken out because they love the talent. But, on a true NFL level, Drake London has not broken out yet. The casual fan does not really know Drake London that well as a great wide receiver. He's just that first round pick in Atlanta who hasn't done that great. Well, this year, we're going to see Drake London take off. He's going to solidify himself. I'm not going to say he's a top 12 dynasty wide receiver just yet. We'll see just how good that offense is. They need a good quarterback first.
Yeah.
But Drake London is going to have a career year, I'd expect, just with that offense changing to be more volume. That always has been the issue with Drake London. The efficiency probably will go down a little bit, but the volume will more than make up for it for our fantasy football purposes. So Drake London, I'm all in on Drake London at the current price.
We've come a long way.
We
Everybody in the
have.
comments, they've
That might
all
be a
calmed
day I
down.
might say to buy Zach Evans, or who knows? We'll
I
see.
wouldn't. I mean, you could buy him for nothing. Just go to your local
There
waiver
you
wire
go.
store and spend zero fab. He's all yours. That's where he should be, at least a low price. But yeah, Drake London, I like this pick. I think, and I shouted this out once, towards the latter half of the season or the end of the season, because for a long time there, Arthur Blank was like, Arthur Smith will be here in 2024. Us
I know,
Arthur
it's
stick
scary.
together. And towards the end of the year, it's like, we'll see how the year ends up. Didn't make the playoffs, and you had to have the good feeling that, Arthur Smith is out. There's a nice buy window while that news wasn't as out there yet to the people.
Yep.
And then, it ticked up a little bit. Value ticked up. Everybody was excited. Oh man, maybe they get like Ben Johnson or something. Maybe they'll get one of these great, possible coaching hires. They end up with Raheem Morris. Everybody hates it. Defensive coach, back to a defensive coach after the Arthur Smith era. And they bring in this great offensive coordinator, or somebody who we at least expect to be a good enough offensive coordinator to get Drake London up off the ground and be that much more efficient and effective and run a talented offense. But at the end of the day, and I think your buy window slams shut once they add quarterback, because that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle. And we've talked about this, it's not hating Drake London, it's hating the value of Drake London and the expectations that are on Drake London. And then the situation around Drake London. If I didn't say that already, I might have, but that's what I'm hinting at. So either which way, Drake London right now, I think this is a good price. I think going to buy him, adding something on top to go buy him, I'm in on it as well. And I think you're looking at fun enough wide receivers at this point in the draft where people are going to be enticed, and rookie fever. My guy is here at the 107. I'm going to go draft Keon Coleman. Wouldn't that be fun?
That's your option. I would love to move off of it.
But for me, I'm going back to the tight end again, and I'm looking for a little younger tight end this time. We saw a bit of a breakout at the end of last year, and again, if you have to add something onto this, I'm pretty okay doing it. This guy won't need as much time to kick up. I don't think he's due for a slow start because Trey McBride coming to the season as of now fully healthy. Anything could happen between now and then, I guess. But Trey McBride, we saw an amazing breakout. All of the stats from when he really took over as the one in that offense. I mean, incredible. And you just see it with him on the field. The command he has as a tight end on the field, in terms of commanding targets and what he does with the ball in his hands, yards per route run, all the fun stuff. This guy's got big things ahead of him, I think, and I think he's cracking into the top 5 of tight ends sooner rather than later, if not already. And somebody I think we're going to be really excited for going forward. And that's regardless of, the favorite draft landing spot right now for Marvin Harrison Jr., to clarify, is the Arizona Cardinals. Trey McBride's still a top 2 target in that offense, and I'm happy with it because I think it helps McBride, if nothing else. And obviously Michael Wilson's still there. Marquise Brown might be there, but Trey McBride is going to get his. Did way too dang much last year to not still get his. He was not a product of convenient volume. He was a product of, this is our big offensive piece right now. This is who we're getting it to. And you could say that, well, convenient volume. If Marvin Harrison is there, what happens? Hey, maybe there's a bigger buy window later. And if there is, and you can send a later pick, even more about it. Because Trey McBride, in my opinion, is here to stay. And I think the sooner y'all catch up on that, the happier you'll be with your tight end slot in fantasy. Nate, feel free to touch on this, or let's get to the quote unquote lightning round where we'll be each doing one pick. The 1-0 Nate, it's on you.
Nate. Yes, I'm excited about this one because in one quarterback, where do you start looking at the quarterback position? And I think at the 108 is where I start to consider Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whatever your flavor. But in one quarterback league, if I have the 108, if I earn the 108, do I really want to pick up a quarterback? Probably not. I probably already have a quarterback. I made the playoffs. I probably already have a somewhat competitive team. But somebody else might want Caleb Williams or one of the other players sitting at the 108. And this is where I can go and maybe pick up a quarterback that I know is going to be a top 12 quarterback. I don't have to guess, like Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. I get a little bit of an age discount. But once again, I'm not going after the veterans because I'm spending a first-round pick. I'm spending that first-round pick on Joe Burrow. I think Justin Herbert's also another option here, but I don't like Justin Herbert's fantasy production as much as I like Joe Burrow, especially with Jim Harbaugh coming into town. Just a little precursor there. Joe Burrow, we know they're going to throw the ball over there in Cincinnati. We know Joe Burrow is surrounded by good wide receivers. I don't have the same thing to say about Justin Herbert there necessarily. So Joe Burrow, yeah, if you're a rebuilding team and you got Joe Burrow, why would you not go get Caleb Williams and shoot for a better quarterback? Maybe you go get a wide receiver you're a big fan of, because there's one quarterback, and who needs a quarterback like Joe Burrow sitting on my roster while I rebuild? That's where you take advantage. You're not probably going to be able to trade the 108 for Joe Burrow for a competitive team that's also in the playoffs with you last year, but a competitive team might not have Joe Burrow. In one quarterback, you're not hoarding quarterbacks like you do in Superflex. So Joe Burrow might be out there. Go see if you can move the 108 for Joe Burrow or your quarterback of choice at that tier, because there's multiple quarterbacks you can choose there. Maybe a little bit farther down, like Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, you might be able to get something on top for the 108. You might still just be a swap for the 108 either way. But I don't mind moving the 108 for a top quarterback that I know I can put in my lineup, kind of set and forget it, and have that position figured out moving forward for a long time.
One thing you touched on there that I think a couple things you touched on there that I think we really need to reiterate is that competitive players, or players that are considered by community consensus to be competitive players, are not always on competitive teams. So it's no guarantee that Joe
Absolutely.
Burrow, who should be on a competitive team or is probably most favored on a competitive team, is going to be on one. The second thing that you touched on there is, in one quarterback leagues, it's a lot easier to acquire depth and accrue depth. Joe Burrow could be somebody's third quarterback. And I'm not saying
Yeah.
like quarterback 3, but somebody could have Kyler Murray, somebody could have Jordan Love. It's like, well, hey, let's diversify the position. Let's go pick up one of these wide receivers that are falling down the board.
Mm-hmm.
Something to think about that, probably more acquirable than you think. I would prefer, I'm in on Justin Herbert still. Because I think he's been dealt kind of a raw hand. I get what you're saying with Burrow at being more surrounded by weapons, at least the ones that aren't aging and ones that are consistent. Keenan Allen, obviously, hitting that cliff or getting there, still had a great season this last year, but
Career year,
it's
honestly.
it's going to happen at some point. We know that. Chase and Higgins might not be there, I guess, but whatever the case is, they got a lot longer to go. Quentin Johnson, not what we want him to be at this point. Don't have a tight end option. Running back is dwindling. We believe that cliff has come and possibly gone.
Yeah.
I still like Justin Herbert as a player, so I don't mind buying it on him even instead of Joe Burrow if that's the option. I think he's maybe even a little bit more accessible, but I have seen in the comments people are concerned with Joe Burrow being a little injury prone, having albeit a freak ACL injury that ended a season that could happen to any quarterback. Did have the calf strain coming into the year. I get it, and then he has this. I believe it was a thumb issue.
Yeah. He's missed more games than Lamar Jackson. Just saying.
Crazy. Those rushing quarterbacks, though, those
We're
are the
talking,
problem.
talking
Those are
about
the
quarterbacks.
problem. Just
I
had to
like
get
my quarterbacks to be a little bit less quarterbacky.
Fair enough. But those are a couple points, big points, and might have some depth at quarterback, the team you're trying to knock on the door with. And I think you can do this with a lot of quarterbacks right now, in all honesty. If you're trying to shore up your room, this could be a good time to do it. Maybe you don't have the great quarterback, but some other team does. You want to pull them away. Like I said, I think you could do this for, Jordan Love. Maybe you get a little bit more back. I think
Yeah.
you could do this for a Kyler and get a little bit more back.
I think it'd be worth asking about like a Jalen Hurts.
I 100% agree. And I'm not going to go buy Jalen Hurts right now, but I do believe if you have a conviction about Jalen Hurts, now is definitely a good time to go buy. I have seen some comments where he's still going for buku bucks, but I have seen a lot of people throwing out very trash offers in our Discord for Jalen Hurts to the people on our Discord, and they're like, "What is this garbage?" We have a meme channel for that, just so y'all know, for bad trade offers. But with all that said, the 108 in the books. Let's move on to the 109. My 109. Again, I'm looking for value at the running back position. I think I got some here. I got 2 picks. One, I think, is a player who we saw a great breakout year from. And, you've brought this player up as somebody we need to put some more respect on the name of. That's James Cook, who was cooking this year. Clearly showed out as the running back 1 in Buffalo. And, retaining the same offensive coordinator that helped him with that breakout into next year. So that's great to see, but has the receiving upside, good enough rushing efficiencies as well. He's not just a receiving back. He's going to get plenty more work. And another guy who I think we can say the same-ish thing about, who maybe doesn't have as much rushing efficiency, but also didn't have a great, running offense around him, didn't have a lot of good running help or offensive line help. That's Rachaad White. You might have to add a little bit more to him. I will say with the caveat to this, and that's why I put James Cook as my primary buy. You have to add a little bit more to Rachaad White, more than likely to go get him. 25 third, nothing crazy. But we also do have a new offensive coordinator coming in. We lost Dave Canales to the Carolina Panthers head coaching job. I'm a little concerned to see how this offense develops in a new system. Maybe it's the same one. Maybe they bring up somebody who was, working closely alongside Canales. Who knows? Or same tree, whatever the case is. Maybe it's similar. Either which way, do we have the same success with Baker in this offense in general that allows Rachaad White to be successful? Those are question marks. But James Cook, not a lot changing. They might bring in another back, and that's okay. Get rid of the ghosts of Latavius Murray. Get rid of Ty Johnson, who actually popped off here and there. Damian Harris. Get rid of these guys, and bring somebody in. Same kind of deal with Kyron. Let them, spell James Cook every now and then. Don't run him 80% of the time. I don't want that with running backs right now, especially ones that are James Cook has a smaller frame. I don't need him doing 300 carries between the tackles every year. No. That's not where I want him to make his money anyway. I want him to catch the ball. I want to get that receiving upside along with some really good rushing efficiency. So that's where I'm going at 109. Nate, feel free to touch on that or roll on into the 110.
With the 110, I'm looking at the running back position. I'm looking at a running back that I'm expecting to break out in 2024. A running back who caught 52 passes for 385 yards and a touchdown this year for a team that doesn't even really pass to the running back, apparently. And that is Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears, I think, is one of the running backs from the 2023 class that is set to break out in 2024. Derrick Henry is not returning to the Tennessee Titans. We pretty much know that for sure at this point. They do have a new offensive coordinator there, the new head coach, the offensive coordinator from the Bengals, which was a much more pass-heavy offense than what we've seen with the Tennessee Titans over the past couple of years. And Tyjae Spears, he's explosive. His lateral ability is incredible as long as his knees are intact, and his receiving ability is really impressive as well. So what he brings to the table in this new offense, I like so much more than what he brought to the table for the Vrabel offense. I don't think he really fit that well. I understand the compliment to Derrick Henry that he gave us, but he fits this incoming offense much more. Will Levis, quarterback they're trying to build around. I'm a real big fan of Tyjae Spears. Even if they add someone, I still think Tyjae Spears is going to be plenty relevant for fantasy football because of that receiving ability. If they grab somebody to be the 1A or 1B in this committee, and that other player is the guy that might be getting the goal line work, might be getting the run inside the 20s, in between the tackles, things like that, and Tyjae Spears is out there more on receiving downs, and when they need some maybe more explosive plays, I'm fine with that. I'm even fine spending the 110 and taking the chance there because his receiving work this year was so solid. You can have a fantasy relevant running back just from that receiving work. Over 50 receptions. I'm going to take that all day for any running back on my team. And Tyjae Spears checks off a lot of boxes for me for upside going into 2024. So if I can move the 110 for him, especially because, hey, if I'm the 110, I won my semifinal matchup. I need someone to push me over the edge to win that championship. Tyjae Spears is that breakout running back that you're buying before the breakout. It's not always too hard.
Yeah, I think this has, to throw a superlative out there, I mentioned it in a previous video too. If we're looking for somebody to be next year's Rachaad White, I think this is as good a bet as any. Somebody that can break out with receiving repertoire, can run really well, between the tackles, bounce outside, whatever the case is. Tyjae Spears can do all that. And I think, too, something to take into consideration that we're seeing more and more and more, and people just need to swallow this tough pill, is that the way the running back landscape is, there's so much talent that it's almost impossible to expect teams not to add some sort of backfield complement.
Yeah.
And we need to be more open when that happens, to not assume that, oh man, they drafted a guy day 2, he's taken day 1 guy's job, whatever the case is, or whoever it may be, because I think there's just so much with the way the running back timeshare era is going. I'm all about throwing together words that just are awesome, but a conky tonk shout out. But with all that said, we just have to be more open when these running backs get drafted, a similar situation where they sign somebody, and not necessarily condemn either option. You don't have to pick one over the other. You can kind of put your foot in both camps, get them both on the same team if you have one, not the other. And that's, I think, a good way to play, is to invest your team in some upside too, with and I think just a good concept in general in all of these. You're buying players or acquiring players that have opportunity to grow in value. And that's a
Mhm.
huge trick to add to your tool belt when you can do that, when you can see these options where, hey, this guy doesn't quite add up. And in all honesty, Nate, I think you can get more on top of Spears with the 110 in total honesty, because I think
Great.
with running backs you're drafting there, if there are any, probably I think are going to be more touted in the community in terms of rankings than Tyjae Spears, unless we make it through the draft and he's like, they bring in no competition.
Yeah.
Maybe it might be a little harder, but if you made this trade right now, I think you're getting something on top. You are putting a little risk on yourself, but because that's full transparency, you are adding a little risk because they might draft Braylon Allen in round 2, and then it's like, well, now what's going to happen? Something like that. And I know everybody hates Braylon Allen, but that's just one example that popped in my head at that immediate second. Speaking of
Wisconsin.
which, yeah, Wisconsin all day. Oregon fan though, but I have to be because I'm still waiting on my 10-page theses from the community trying to sway me to follow or
Yep.
be on their team's bandwagon this year. But while I'm waiting for that, let's dive into the 111. What am I looking to get out of the 111 or the 112? But I'm saying with the 111 because that's my pick that is designated to me. My targeted compensation here is a 25 first round pick. And now this is multifaceted because what this pick can do, we all know once the draft board is ticking down, any pick from 111 to the 202, I'm open, willing, and considering trading that for a next year first, any given year. And I'm confident I can usually get that first more often than not. And I think sometimes I might be able to get a little bit more on top, probably not in the
Yep.
second, but in the first, I can probably pull a third, I think. But this is multifaceted because with this late of a pick, as a competitive team, if this is our pick, for example, we lost in the championship round. We need to do something to possibly add more to our roster. But Bob, why aren't we adding a player then? Hold on, baby birds, I'll feed you. Of course, we could draft somebody with the hope that they rise in value. Maybe a running back is here at decent value, who knows? Or we could flip this pick, for like I mentioned, for a reroll on draft position for the 2025 offseason and create an opportunity for the pick to exponentially increase in value. Everybody, when they trade me this 25 first or this next year first, they think it's going to be later than it is.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert, it usually isn't. And that's a lot of times because they know what teams to target, but that's another discussion for another day. But as a bonus, what people don't think about with this move when you are a competitive team, you get to roll over this pick and add to your war chest for the 2024 season that you can use this pick down the stretch to make moves in season.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm having trouble, whatever the case is, and this pick is adjacent to myself, who knows where that pick is landing? That pick might be trending towards the top 6 pick. Who knows? You don't have to trade the pick you got. If you still have the picks you have 2 firsts, you can move your later one that you still expect to be a back half of the first round pick. You can keep this pick, hold on to it for next year, or you can move both these picks and go buy yourself somebody that's really elite that instead of a Band-Aid that might fill lineup gaps throughout the rest of the season, then God knows what happens after. You might be able to buy a really good asset with 2 first-round picks and 1 quarterback that's going to get you a long way. You might be able to buy a really nice asset that can help you long-term over the future and get you over some humps now. This is something that people don't think about when they add that 25 first. And, when you're adding future draft capital, when you're competitive, it's not just about the back end of wherever your competitive run is. It's not just about having draft picks next year. That's one facet. But draft picks and part of the value of them is they are so multifaceted that you can use them for situations like this to help fix lineup gaps when you need them. So this is what I'm looking to do with the 111. If I'm trading out, if I don't like what's on the board, who knows? That's just what I'm looking to get at this pick. Nate, feel free to touch on this or wrap it up with the 112.
Yeah, I love you really doubling down on talking about how that 25 first doesn't mean you have to wait until the draft in 2025 to actually use it. Getting that 2025 first is it's adding depth to your team. You
Exactly.
just don't have that specific player yet. Now you're going to add that depth whether or not you draft one next May or June, or if you pick one up through a trade. And it doesn't have to be in the season. It might be in August or July. You might find a player that you want to trade for. So it's always good to pick up more assets. Always better to have that kind of value and then be able to use it later. But going into the last pick of this video, the 112, I'm targeting another wide receiver, a bit more veteran wide receiver than many of them I've already talked about. But can I get a veteran wide receiver to fill in my slot position while also picking up a little bit of extra draft capital? I'm going after Christian Kirk and a late second, early third with the 112 here. I think because it has a 1 at the front of it, I think I can get a late second. If it was a 201, I think I'd have to be getting an early third. So I'm going to use that to my advantage. I think Christian Kirk is a great buy right now. I know a lot of people are low on Trevor Lawrence. I know the rumors are that Calvin Ridley's coming back to the Jaguars. I don't really care about either one of those things. I think that Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback who's going to continue to improve. He showed a lot of, connection and chemistry with Christian Kirk. Calvin Ridley, we saw what he did when Zay Jones wasn't there. He ran a lot of go routes. He ran a lot of wind sprints. And I don't think that the Jaguars are, whether or not Ridley's there, he's not the wide receiver 1 that we were hoping he was going to be with the Falcons. That's just the truth of it at this point. He's going to be turning 29, I believe, next season. He is a good wide receiver 2. And I'm not going to argue that Christian Kirk is an elite wide receiver 1 either. But Calvin Ridley is not a threat to go above Christian Kirk. At worst, they are 1A and 1B. And what we saw this year was that Christian Kirk, when he was on the field, he was the wide receiver 1, and Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 2. That was pretty set in stone for most of the season when they were on the field together. And then going into next year, whether or not Ridley's there, whether or not they go and draft another wide receiver, Christian Kirk's still going to be the wide receiver 1. And with how he performs each and every single year, this was the year he didn't play the full season. He didn't break 1,000 yards, but he has had 1,000 yards the last 2 seasons, including 99 receptions for 1,200 yards last year and 10 touchdowns in 2022. An incredible season. He saw 150 targets. He is a target hog when he's on the field. He's kind of my new Deontay, as the Steelers offense is trash. Deontay used to be my guy to go to because of his PPR volume. That's Christian Kirk now. He's a guy I've been all about for the last 2 years, and I continue to want to buy into him. He is only 27 years old going into next season, so you still got some time with Christian Kirk. I like that he's in his prime as Trevor Lawrence is really starting to find his – I don't know what I want to say. His groove. Christian Kirk, someone I definitely want to go after with the 112. And like I said, I think you can get a late second on top of that because Christian Kirk is that veteran wide receiver. He's not the young, exciting thing. And you're trading a first-round pick, so you should be able to get a second-round pick on top of him.
Yeah, and coming off of what was seen by many as a down year and an injury. So I think 100%. And to add on to this point, whoever you're targeting here or whenever you're in this similar situation where you're trying to push for a late second to add on to or an early third, if you can't get the second, look to see if they have an early third in that 01, 02 range. And then we take that pick, we flip it to next year for an upgraded round. So take that 01, that 301, the 302, turn it into a 25 second. Guess what? We're still a competitive team, and we're adding picks to our war chest that we can use if needed or keep for the draft to do whatever the heck we want. We can draft with it, trade out with it, trade down with it, trade up with it, sideways, backwards, frontwards. Who knows? There's so much on the table with what you can do with your rookie drafts that are upcoming. But with all that said, we are going to get the heck on out of here. But before we do, be sure you like the video, comment down below what you're looking to do with your picks in your 1 quarterback drafts. And be sure to get in on that 7-day free trial at patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind on me and Nate. You can use, there's no promo code or anything. It's just free on us today, I guess. And forever. It's going to be there all the time. So in the $1 and $5 tier, check that out. Get in on some bonus podcasts. Get in on that Discord. Let's talk about it. Get in with the Chris Fix on the 1 quarterback sensation. We love you guys too. We wanted to drop this for y'all. Had a lot of feedback from the Superflex video asking me to 1 quarterback. So here we are. If you want to keep, 1 quarterback content coming on this channel,
keep supporting.
Hey, it's gonna be there. Keep supporting, subscribe, like if you're new, all of the things. But with all of that said, all the promo in the books, and last but not least, if you want help figuring out your roster for 2024, check out the roster reviews in the pinned comment below or the YouTube description. But now that is it. All the promos in the books. We're going to get on out of here. We will see you in the next one. But until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.